Try this again, Brianna. Thank you for being patient with us. I appreciate it. When technology goes awry, I appreciate y'all hanging with us. So, we're preparing for the Roe decision. How has that been preparing for it? We've had a couple months now to prepare for it. It's been kind of a nightmare. I know I'm feeling stressed about it. I can't imagine what other folks are feeling. How are you feeling as an advocate who works on this every single day?
Yeah, you are right. It is a bit of a nightmare, especially not knowing exactly when it will come down and waking up every other new day, wondering, is this the day? And then realizing it's not. It has been difficult, especially because so many of us who are doing this work are also directly impacted by this decision. And in general, a lot of folks are just feeling a lot of fear and uncertainty right now about what the state of access to reproductive care will look like in the future and how this will impact their lives. It's worth stating though that for many of our communities, like poor, rural, indigenous, and communities of color, there has always been many barriers to access to abortion care and even unprecedented time, and this is a devastating decision that is really going to impact all of our lives. But we do keep fighting really just because we care for our communities and because they deserve people to be fighting, and because we have to, because everybody deserves to have access to reproductive care and to be able to control their own bodies, lives, and futures. And this is not new for us. Generations before us have fought tirelessly to gain these rights and protect them, and so we just have to continue that fight.
Absolutely. So, what should people in Nevada be prepared to do once a decision is made, final, and Roe potentially is overturned? And what should our elected officials be doing? And for those at home, I know there's an echo. We're working on it, so just bear with us and live with the echo for a few minutes while we work on it.
So what should folks be doing? I think when the decision comes down, the first thing to do is just take a breath, take care of yourself, take care of your people, your communities. This decision is going to be very difficult for a lot of people to conceptualize and to really process. And then also know that abortion is still legal in Nevada. Regardless of this decision, abortion will remain legal in Nevada. So if you have any appointments, if your friends have any appointments, your family, make sure y'all keep your appointments. If you need to make an appointment, do that. Abortion care will still be legal in Nevada. Also, be ready to engage with organizations that are doing work on the ground, fighting for reproductive justice, like Planned Parenthood. We have a week of action next week where volunteers and activists can engage in all kinds of ways every day of the week, both in person and virtually. So look at ways that you can get involved, that you can channel that fear and that anger and that sadness or whatever you're feeling. And support your local abortion fund. So in Nevada, we have the Wild West Access Fund. Planned Parenthood also has patient assistance funds, and just help spread the word and help gather donations for these funds that are really going to be helping people achieve access to the care that they need, because many people are going to have to travel for care, will have to find childcare, will have to take time off of work, find lodging, and all of that is expensive, and not everybody has the ability to do that. And then what should we expect from our elected officials? We need to be voting for champions of reproductive justice. We are past the time where tacit acceptance of abortion care and of reproductive justice is okay. We need people who are willing to say the word abortion, who are gonna fight like hell to protect and expand access in our state, because this is now more important than ever.
Thank you for that, Brianna. And again, for those at home watching, we know there's a little bit of an echo. Just bear with us. Bev is working on it on the back end. But we're going to keep going with this topic because it's super important, and we want to make sure that we're getting the information out there. So we know there's an echo. Just bear with us, and we're getting it fixed on the back end. So I want to move to Catherine. Catherine, thank you so much for joining us. You are the health and sex editor at She Knows. You know, in your journalism career, what changes have you observed in how abortion and reproductive health policy has advanced and also has been covered by journalists around the country?
Well, first of all, it's great to be here. I wish it were under better circumstances. We all wish we weren't here for this reason, but I've been covering repro rights in some manner, shape, or form over the last decade, from straight up researching anti-abortion extremists to reporting health and sex. So I've seen the full gamut of what girl boss feminism, nobody likes abortion, nobody loves abortion, it's a necessary evil kind of rhetoric brought us, which is a sense of complacency, both among like affluent citizens and our politicians, and we've seen that attitude lead us to this point where Roe was very much on the chopping block. And then we've seen just a slew of anti-abortion legislation hit throughout the state legislatures, which, as we know, is how they were able to do this. And this is part of the long-time plan of this particular anti-abortion group. And I use that terminology especially because we're not doing PR for them. Don't say pro-life, and that's like my pro tip to everyone. Don't do it. Don't.
Catherine, disinformation is a big thing that we've been talking about at our organization. So, specifically on abortion, is it more prevalent than ever before in what you're seeing? And how have the sources and the ridiculous claims, which I used to work at Planned Parenthood, I used to see the disinformation out in front of the health centers every single day, but now they've taken to the internet and gotten all the QAnon weirdos fired up about it too. How have these ridiculous claims changed in light of the recent political developments and the people who we're electing, unfortunately, to governments?
Well, I'd say I don't necessarily know if it's more prevalent, but it's emboldened. It's been the junk science and the same junk science turtles all the way down since the beginning. Nonsense about conception and fertilization as a place to, start a pregnancy and therefore start banning reproductive health care. All of the baseline stuff about trap laws that go against the fact that abortion is a super safe procedure. It can be managed so easily and so carefully by healthcare providers when it's accessible and affordable. And even just like the long con of the so-called heartbeat bills, which I think everyone at this point is like, you can get heart tissue to beat in a petri dish. That is not a heartbeat. Again, that information and misinformation has been making the rounds forever, and it's been used to bully people at sidewalks, all of this stuff. And the emboldened nature of it is because they have the right who is seeking to take, these rights away from us, have been working on this legislation for years. They have the modeled legislation from the American United for Life, from all of those organizations that just take this prepackaged junk and hand it off to legislators to push through. So that's the big thing, is it's everywhere, it's baked in, and it's not about it being scientifically accurate for them. It's about getting it through the courts and making this procedure harder and harder to access.
Yeah, nothing about this is about the courts or about what's best for people's bodies or what's best for my uterus. It's about them having babies and letting them grow up so then they can put them in a classroom so they can all be shot, is the way I see it. So it's not about what's best for kids. It's about what's best for their political agendas.
And no infrastructure for safety for parents. Like, your parenting choice, that's the reproductive justice angle about this.
Well, right. And once you pop it out, they don't really care about it. That child should just pull itself up by its bootstraps and, get back into the mines and, make something of themselves. Once it's born, they don't care about it. They only care about it when it's in fetus form.
Get a job, babies.
Yeah, that's right. Buck up. All right, let's bring in Bradley because I know he's got some sass to bring into this conversation. Bradley, it's been quite the week for the Supreme Court, my friend.
Yeah.
We're not just going to talk about abortion. We're going to talk about everything. So religious funding for religious schools, my taxpayer dollars get to go talk about the space ferry, all kinds of crap this week. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. Why don't we start with the main decision regarding the school vouchers, because it's particularly galling. But look, much like well, first of all, thanks for having me again. It's a pleasure always to be here, not only with you, but with my comrades who are fighting every day. And I really appreciate Catherine and Brianna's interventions. Much like the anti-abortion project, the project to destroy and consume public schools into the private sector is a long-term project. It has been a half a century in the making. Today's decision is a culmination of sorts of much of that. And look, as much as we like to think that many of the Trumpian folks we know and the nonsense that they spout and the garbage that they talk seems fairly ridiculous, there are sophisticated people running long-term communications projects that are undermining abortion rights and public schools and all these things. And what I saw today, well, let's first describe what happened. In certain parts of Maine, the state has decided not to have secondary schools. That there are vast parts of that state that simply they either don't have the transportation or they don't have the public schools. So what they've done is said, all right, we will give you money, parents, to go to private schools. But they restricted that, and they said, well, you can't go to a religious school. This has to be a substitute for free public education. We're going to give you free private education of a secular variety. This is going to stand in for that. If you want to go to a religious school, like always, you can pay, you can go, you can do that. You can't do it with taxpayer money. What the Supreme Court said was, if you're handing out money to do this voucher system, you have to let it go to wherever a parent directs it to go, including religious non-secular schools. And let me tell you why this is a victory for the right. Their language about this project, the voucher project, for 10 or 15 years now has been about focusing on the money and where it goes, right? Not about that it's taxpayer money, that it's going to religious schools. To avoid that, what they've said for the last 10 or 15 years is, and you hear this in Nevada among this crowd that's running these initiatives, right? That it's not their money, it's not taxpayer money, it's your money, parents. And so you should be able to spend it however you want. And the Supreme Court today sort of validated that by saying that money goes to the parents who can make the decision. Your control over that money stops when you give it to them. It is no longer taxpayer money, it's theirs now, right? Even though it has to be earmarked for educational purposes. That is, that is a victory for those folks, right? It sort of plays into the notion, which is fairly ridiculous the way the voucher folks talk about school funding. This idea that, well, we spend $10,000 per child as an average across the state, therefore we can just give you $10,000 and off you go with the taxpayer money, no means testing, no anything, you can use it for whatever you want. I guess you could apply that to policing or fire or anything else. I will opt out of fire protection if you just give me the money that you spend per, or actually we'd be better off with the policing. You give me the money and I won't call them, right? I guess, whatever it is. Anyway, there was a stamp of approval of that way of thinking by the Supreme Court today, and it's going to be a problem going forward. It's hopefully it can be contained in its particular context, right? The main context was we're not providing public schools in portions of our state, and therefore we have this program for vouchers. I think that it may backfire though on portions of the right, because I think what it'll do is it will if anyone was toying with the notion of a voucher program like this, it may in fact make it less likely and raise opposition, because people will know, well, we're just handing money to secular or to non-secular schools that have over which the curriculum can be anything at all, and that's fine for a non-secular school. It's not fine with my taxpayer money, with our taxpayer money, to do that. So I think that one of the results of this may be a greater pushback to creating programs like this. We'll see. But that was That was the main case today, and that was not unexpected, much like the rest of this.
I have a question on this one though, Bradley, before we get into like the loss of Miranda rights and various other rights in this country. How does this impact, we had our own voucher case, which you fought for us, before the Nevada Supreme Court, and it was deemed that taxpayer dollars could not go to public schools because public schools are public schools and not needing, they need taxpayer dollars.
Yeah.
And so, I was one of the people who fought very hard to defeat that during legislative session because I believe that my taxpayer dollars should go to public institutions for public education and not to religious schools, which I don't believe need my taxpayer dollars. Also, if we're going to go down that slippery slope, then churches should probably pay taxes then.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, how does that impact the case here in Nevada and in what we have done to fight back against this Betsy DeVos, Koch brother voucher scheme to essentially defund our public schools?
Yes. Well, I mean, I certainly agree that the overall project is to destroy public schools and to sort of privatize them. Today's ruling would be a step backwards for that because while obviously the main context is a little different than ours. A general reading of this is that the momentum is with the notion that if you're giving out money for vouchers, you cannot control where it goes. And so if a parent says, I want to send it to a school that is, look, anything from a strict religious school to, any other type of school, I guess, it doesn't even have to be a religious school, it'd be any kind of school, would be the parent's choice, right? So that your taxpayer, if you're giving out taxpayer dollars, what the Supreme Court said today was, you can't put the limitation you and I are talking about on those dollars.
Okay, well, that's depressing. Let's move into the other horrific case today. I mean, there was a plethora of them. So
yeah, take your pick. Which one are we on now?
This week is bleak, Bradley, just like next week. So as the Senate today moves towards voting on gun violence prevention policy for, for what it's worth. I mean, it's a decent enough package for this Senate, I guess I'll say. The Supreme Court today decided that a case pertaining to gun laws out of New York that was over 100 years old. The law was over 100 years old in New York. They overturned that.
Yep.
Do you think it's likely that this could be a broad ruling that makes passing gun laws at state and local levels more difficult? And also, in my humble opinion, I actually think it gives strength to the gun lobby because now these permitless carry nonsense laws that you can basically carry a gun anywhere and everywhere at all times I think it's a slippery slope now towards that. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't even call it a slope at the moment. We're falling into a crevasse, right? I mean, this, if your question is, will this make it more difficult to regulate gun ownership, even in a reasonable way? Absolutely, it will. I mean, the New York law in question is, as you said, was a long one with lots of tradition behind it. But the law was, if you want to apply for and receive a concealed carry permit, you have to justify it, right? You have to show a reason for it, not just that you want that thing, right? And what the Supreme Court did, what Justice Thomas's opinion said was that's not justified by the history and tradition of gun regulation in this country going back to essentially the 17th century. And so, it wouldn't be so bad if the only upshot of the opinion was you can't make someone justify their for particular reasons why they want a concealed carry as opposed to just carry. Okay, that'd be unfortunate, but it would be disastrous. However, the court went further than that and instead constructed a set of tests for gun regulations going forward now that is essentially impossible for a state to comply with, because it's and originalism does this. Originalism is one of those things that makes people sound really smart because they've done enough of the sort of reading, or they have law clerks that can do it, and you can pick anything out of history over time. But originalism makes you sound smart without actually having to do the work of being smart. And so what Justice Thomas constructed was this sort of weird time travel in which you have to demonstrate that the regulation you're placing upon gun ownership has roots essentially going back to 1790. Or failing that, if you can show that particular regulation has roots going back through the 1860s. And if not, it's going to be invalid. Leaving aside the notion that most of the weapons we use today were not only not invented at the time, weren't even conceived of at the time. So I feel it's going to be difficult for us to talk about regulating weapons in a way that will satisfy this majority. Now, look, the opinion is insulting if you read it, but it's so insulting and so unworkable that it will live only as long as this majority lives, unless there is a Supreme Court after this that is so annoyingly liberal that it has such respect for even horrible precedents, which I do not put it past the liberal wing of American juridical politics to say, well, look, it's horrible and it's awful, but precedent's precedent. We don't want people to stomp it in, getting rid of precedent the way they do every time they have power. So this thing will die off very quickly. But what you're going to see between now and then is you're going to see this kind of challenge to every single gun ownership regulation in the country that will trickle its way up through the circuits to the Supreme Court on the hunt for 200-year-old precedent for the regulation you're talking about. And failing it, it will be struck down. So we will have many, many gun regulations struck down, and there will be many, many more guns, both available, seen in public, and concealed in public without regulation. So that's today in Supreme Court.
No, we missed one. There's still one more.
Oh yes,
we're gonna get to that in just a second.
I don't want to take all of them.
It's real depressing this week, everyone. But and then we're gonna come back to abortion and really depress everybody. So just get ready, strap in tonight, folks. This is a real rage fest tonight. Can't wait. Okay, Bradley, and I'm going to actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about Miranda rights. We're going to go back to Brianna and others and talk about abortion. And then I'm going to come back to you, and you and Will are going to have just a general courts fest in a little bit. So Miranda rights. So that's another thing that was on the chopping block. I should mention too, last week, they also, I guess, are letting Border Patrol agents do whatever the hell they want now. And if you harass people in public like that or whatever, violate people's rights, it's no big deal anymore.
Without review or
MBD.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. All right, but let's talk about Miranda rights. First of all, Bradley, but for people who don't know, what are Miranda rights and why were those established? Because those were established from another Supreme Court case, and they're actually really important.
Yeah, this is everyone does know, they just may not know that they're called that, right? Everyone who's ever watched a police television show knows that, you have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you, right? Everyone knows that. It's sort of built into the process of being arrested, right? In fact, when you don't hear that, people, even unsophisticated people, know immediately. I didn't hear that. You didn't do that. I don't have to talk without my lawyer being present. In fact, the first thing you should say is, I want a lawyer, right? No matter what kind of situation you're in. What the police did what the Supreme Court did today wasn't to actually get rid of Miranda. They just made Miranda not matter anymore. You still have your Miranda rights. You just can't do anything about it if they're ignored. Most criminal cases do not make it to trial. If you were not read your rights, your Miranda rights, and you gave a statement to the police, and the police used that at trial, or tried to use it at trial, it would still be inadmissible. 99.99999% of criminal cases never go to trial. They get pled out, they get pled up, they get settled somehow or the other. And what police are going to be able to do now is not read you your Miranda rights, extract information from you under pressure, especially the vulnerable, who are, when you're detained and you're in a particular situation, you are as vulnerable as you could possibly be. And you have no recourse if this happens to you. You can't sue because of it. You can't fight back over it. You can't do a thing, because the only place that your Miranda rights violation will matter now is at a trial. Now, I don't know if that's going to force more things to trial. If it happens, I doubt it. What will likely happen is there'll be hundreds, if not thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Miranda violations that accrue to the advantage of prosecutors and the police and are never recognized or remedied because of what the Supreme Court did today. This was a really bad day for the rights of not just the accused, but the detained. The merely detained got screwed today.
It was a really bad day for all Americans because of the Supreme Court. Okay. So on that note, Bradley, we're going to come back to you in just a minute because I'm going to bring in our courts, everything. He'll talk to you more. We'll talk more. We'll talk a lot of shit in just a minute. All right, Brianna, I'm going to bring you back in. Let's fully depress people now. I've got my bands off our bodies in case people missed it earlier because I'm not here for the Supreme Court deciding what I get to do about my body or my uterus because my uterus is not a people carrier. So, Brianna, will abortion services in Nevada be affected by the decision if the decision is bad and comes down from the Supreme Court? And are there things the community can be doing to help our healthcare system prepare? Because we're going to see an influx of people coming here because of a certain law that exists in Nevada, and we should be very proud of that. So explain what those laws are first, and then explain how we support our healthcare system.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the right to abortion care in Nevada is statutorily protected. So that just means that it would take a vote of the people to overturn. So even regardless of whatever decision comes down from the Supreme Court, we will still have abortion access in Nevada. And the only way that we could lose that is through a vote of the people, and Nevadans overwhelmingly support access to abortion care. So that is the positive. Will this impact actual services in Nevada? Yes, absolutely. We will see such an influx of patients in from states that will ban abortion, like Arizona and Utah and Idaho. And that is really going to put a burden on our healthcare system. We've already seen that kind of impact from patients that have come from Texas into some neighboring states, and we will continue to see that. When this decision comes down, 26 states will likely swiftly ban abortion care. 13 of those states are poised to have bans immediately go into effect. And that means that nearly half of Americans of reproductive age and ability will not have access to abortion care. So the reality of that is that they are going to have to travel to states that do have abortion connected, like Nevada, or they will have to go without care. And that influx of patients coming into our state will mean that patients in Nevada will also struggle to receive the care that they need because we just have a limited access to care currently. So I think prepare our healthcare systems. One, like I said earlier, donate to your local abortion funds. That certainly helps with supporting the patients that are coming in. But then also for your appointments, schedule them as soon as you know that you need them. There's no mandated waiting period in Nevada to access an abortion. However, there is already a waiting period that you can expect from most health centers when you try to make an appointment. And that waiting period will only increase. And we know that waiting periods are especially difficult when it comes to abortion care. If you know that you need care, or if you have a friend that knows, like, make sure you just schedule that care right away because it may take a while to get that care.
Absolutely. And, with abortion services from, other states potentially being impacted, and with everything, around us potentially going south for a lot of people who can get pregnant, Nevada is going to have a spotlight on it this year because for once in my life, and probably yours, Brianna, we are seeing Nevada actually doing something right, thanks to many of our foremothers who thought of this, in the 90s and said, we've got to get this protected. So if Roe ever falls, Nevadans will be protected when it comes to our abortion rights. How do you think this plays into the election? Because I think Nevada, I know, Nevada is a pro-choice state. People across all party lines support people's rights to access abortion care. And I believe this is going to be a really big deal in the 2022 election. And we're already seeing candidates saying the word abortion, which I've never seen before. And so how do we think this is going to impact these elections? And specifically, when we're talking about people who are anti-choice, like Lombardo or Laxalt, especially Laxalt, who has an abysmal, record on choice, how do you think that plays into it, especially with these men kind of wading into our politics, telling us to do what to do with our bodies?
Yeah, well, you're right, Annette. Nevadans overwhelmingly support access to abortion care, and that crosses party lines. So we know that. And there's a lot of research that shows that voters, a lot of voters are single issue voters, and this is one of those issues. So voters are going to be turning out in droves on this issue specifically. And we are now entering a time when your access to abortion care depends who your governor is and who is in your state legislature. And that is unprecedented. And that is something new in many of our lifetimes. So I think a lot of Nevadans are going to be voting on this issue. I think a lot of Nevadans should be voting on this issue, should be analyzing who are the candidates that are going to fight for my reproductive rights and that will continue to protect and expand that access. Because this is really, now we're in a place where whoever is in our state offices can really impact the care that you will receive.
So Brianna, I'm just going to be kind of blunt with you and go back to part of the first question I asked you before our technology went on the fritz tonight. When the decision comes down, I think there's going to be a lot of shock, a lot of dismay. I think even if you know it's coming, it's still going to hit you like a ton of bricks. I'm speaking for myself right now. I'm going to be a walking mess that day because in my humble opinion, of all the issues I have the privilege to work on every single day, this one I think probably is nearest and dearest to my heart. What do people do? People are going to be angry. People are going to be upset. People are going to be sad. People are going to want to do something. What do people do and how do people take action immediately? Yes, the elections are great. And you damn well better go out and vote for people who are going to protect your right to make decisions about your body. And that is not Joe Lombardo and that is not Adam Laxalt, for the record. But what do people do in that moment? How do they help Planned Parenthood? How do they help people protect other folks' rights and abilities to make their decisions about their bodies? How do we make sure that people still have access to abortion in Nevada? What do we do? How do we take to the streets?
Yeah, absolutely. So one, I would say first, make sure that you're caring for yourself and your community. That is important. Like you said, Annette, there's going to be a lot of emotions. And if you're processing a lot, that is important. Dealing with that is important. We really need people to support our abortion funds, like the Wild West Access Fund. We really need people to support the Planned Parenthood Patient Assistance Fund because of all of those patients that are going to be coming in. And we need people to actually engage. It means more than just showing up to a rally, though that is important and that is a good outlet for our anger, but you need to sign up to volunteer and engage in the work and learn about what we're doing and how we're fighting to continue to expand access in Nevada. Because we just need people, we need this to be an issue that is, like Annette said, the focus of like one of the biggest issues in your life and the focus of your work, because we're at a point right now where we need as many defenders of abortion care as possible.
And I see all of your excellent questions coming in the chat, so keep them coming. We're gonna probably go just a little bit over tonight to make sure we can get to audience questions and also we'll join our conversation in just a minute. So keep the questions coming in on the chat, on Twitch, on YouTube, on Twitter. If you want to join the conversation, now's the time to put those questions in the chat and we'll get to them in just a little bit. And also make sure you're sharing this conversation with your friends. It's super important and we want to have more folks join the conversation. All right, so Catherine, I want to bring you back in. You know, now we're talking about the aftermath, what people do in the aftermath when, I don't even say if anymore, when this decision is made by these conservative, out of touch judges on the Supreme Court. How do you plan to cover the aftermath of this decision and take into account the very real consequences this is going to have on so many people's lives all across this country, especially people who are low income, poor people, people of color disproportionately will be affected by this decision? And do you see journalism playing a significant role in shaping the future policy that will protect access to abortion, at least in these states, and hopefully in the future, a future case that can overturn this mess that they're about to make?
Yeah. So the thing about our media environment right now, which I don't know if y'all have noticed, is it happens at a whiplash, crazy pace where it's really easy for human rights violations and atrocities that come across our screens every 5 minutes to just get buried under the next one. I mean, case in point, having to deal with so many horrific things in one short hour. It's just, that's the nature of the beast right now. So it's really important for the people who are telling these stories, who are putting out these communications, and for journalists to know that this is a long game. The decision's going to drop. We all know it. The leak was a good example. We know, and it feels a little bit like a slow moving horror movie, but it's important then that when this moment hits, that we all know it's going to hit, we can find the strength to continue pushing and telling the stories, pushing for why this is a violation, why the marginalized communities particularly are going to be harmed, because rich people and affluent white people have always been able to get the care they want for the people they want to have it, and that will always remain true. So remembering there that part of speaking truth to power then is forcing the issue of accountability, making sure that politicians who run on protecting abortion rights but don't say the word, don't actually vote that way, don't actually do anything, that you're holding them accountable, making sure that this story isn't something that's going to be a really sad Roe weekend full of sad stories about white women and their abortions or coat hanger memes or something horrible, but that this is a sustained narrative that is part of the economic futures for people who can get pregnant, that this is part of all of our futures, and that this isn't an issue they can just bury and frog boil us into getting used to it, you know. And there's a vested interest in us internalizing yet another atrocity, yet another painful thing, like the pandemic, like economic disenfranchisement. We're a tired, overworked population who kind of is like, okay, what's the next bad thing? And that hopelessness is where this is going to continue to thrive and the rights are going to continue to roll back. So we need stories and communications that are going to push us back on our feet and reclaim these rights, and then recognize that Roe was the floor. That's the baseline, like bare minimum. We want expansions on a state level that's going to make it easier for everyone to get this care, make the care even better than it was at the height of what people who were complacent thought, you know, they had. Because the thing is, you never actually had the volume of freedom you thought you did, because there were, between the Hyde Amendment, between everything else, poor people, working class people were always getting the short end of the stick.
Catherine, before we go to my next question, I want to kind of dive into something you talked a little bit about, because it's a huge pet peeve of mine as somebody who's had the privilege to work on abortion full time before at Planned Parenthood, and now in this work, who runs my mouth constantly about the need to protect this critical access to this care. You know, you said that abortion isn't this scary thing. And I don't believe it's scary at all anymore. You know, you can have an abortion with pills that takes very short amount of time. It's safer than Advil. The studies are showing to take. You can do this in your own home. It's safe. It should be legal, and it should be easily accessible. So my question to you is why is it so important for us to get away from the stigmas of abortion with coat hangers and all of that, which, yes, did our foremothers have to go through some of that? Absolutely. But we need to get away from that and destigmatize abortion and make it less scary and show how safe it is and how accessible it should be for all people who need to access abortion.
We're speaking the same language here, because truly, I think we have to honor our past in this way and honor what people had to survive, or in so many cases not survive. That's an important part of this work. But fundamentally, right now, we have a volume of care where abortion is safer than, for a lot of people. We have a Black maternal health crisis where Black mothers are dying at insane rates. Like, pregnancy is more dangerous than abortion. And when handled with care, like any other procedure, with, you know, no barriers, no having to make a long drive or hope somebody's taking care of your kids, once you remove those barriers, it's just a procedure like anything else. And it's so important for us to just be able to do that, because that will also allow us to have like a secular and just more compassionate view of the choices people need to make. And the thing is, you do know somebody who's had an abortion, and you love somebody who's had an abortion, and you love a lot of people who are here because somebody was able to have an abortion. And I think that's something like that is so important, because, and this is why I'm always like, don't let them have pro-life, because you know what is pro-life and pro-quality of life is letting people make the right decisions for their bodies and their families. That is life. That is like the love of being able to access this kind of care. And that's where I'm like, that's the rebrand we need. Everyone I know who works in repro is the most joyful, the most loving. They have just an incredible energy and passion for this work, and passion for people who need care and the providers. And I think like, if you were only able to meet them and talk with them, you would just see that this particular issue is not something to be feared. This is something to be embraced. Like, this community is good. And that's like I'm always screaming about it to everyone, is like, these are people who care about pregnant people in a way that those who are bullying people on sidewalks couldn't even fathom.
You know, when the Alito draft was leaked and he decided to call all of us abortionists, I just leaned in, because I was like, yeah, you know what? Hell yeah, I'm an abortionist. Hell yeah, I believe in people's right to access abortion. And if you want to say that's some sort of slang version of an insult to me, absolutely not. I'm not afraid of the word abortion, and I'm not afraid of the procedure. In fact, when I was at Planned Parenthood, they had a program where you could go in and actually observe people going through the process of medication abortions or surgical abortions. And I opted to do that because I wanted to understand what the experience of these people was going through those procedures. And I met a woman who was 56 years old, had 2 grown adult children, thought she had gone through menopause, accidentally got pregnant, and decided she needed to have an abortion. And that was a decision that was right for her life. And she was too old, in her opinion, to have another child, and wanted to make that decision for herself. And those are the stories that often stick with me when I talk to people, especially anti-choice people who do not understand the decisions that people are making for their own lives, for their own livelihoods. It's none of anybody else's business what these folks are doing. So does the media, when I'm talking about that, I'm obviously not using her name, I'm not using any, identifiers for her, but I'm sharing that story because it's an important example. So does the media have a responsibility to keep those seeking abortion care anonymous? And how do we balance that need with people, for people to share their stories, with the need to protect people's privacy and livelihoods? Because some people want to share their story, but maybe scared because of the anti-choice wackos standing in the parking lot, harassing and threatening them.
Fundamentally, like, as a journalist, one of the first things my favorite J professors said was, you're not entitled to anyone's story. It's a gift. It's something they share with you. So from like just a storytelling perspective and everything else, you have to do that work. And if they don't trust you, and if you cannot be a caretaker for that story, where it's going to land in all of those places, and give them an informed idea of what's going out there when they attach their name, like, you have no business calling them your source. They're not. Like, so we owe so much to people who choose to tell their stories. And at this point, it's become a meme of itself, where as we watched each new scary bill pass through state legislatures and make it this far, and everyone who knows how the story was going to go went, this could be the one that's going to hit the Supreme Court, there was an outpouring of women and pregnant people and people who can give birth sharing, for some of them, a joyful moment, obviously making a choice, but for some of them, some of the hardest choices of their lives, and having to open a vein on the internet and beg somebody to view their humanity and validate it. And that part, obviously, I think that's the most horrific thing, because you want to be equal parts like proud of them and you love it, but you're like, this is your healthcare. You don't need to share the details of your colonoscopy, and you shouldn't be expected to. You also shouldn't be expected to share this. This is your body. It is your family. And that sense of privacy is so important. And we have the utmost responsibility leaning toward, because the next wave of legislation from the anti-choice movement, now that they've, subdued Roe, is that they want to start targeting the helpers. They want to target the people who are trying to make abortion more accessible. They want to try to, attack from that angle. We've seen all sorts of fun bills coming through there that could allow frivolous lawsuits and all that goodies. And leading forward, we need to look at our community and this infrastructure, which is there. Your people have been prepping for this. Abortion funds, every single activist network I know, my friends at Abortion Action Front, where I used to work, Liz Winstead's operation, are doing a training day on the 17th, which I think if you're looking for something to do, it's a really great chance to hop in. But these people also need to be protected. We need to look out for us and make sure that this network of joyful, compassionate caregivers and providers are taken care of, so that then we can take care of people who need their health care. And media, we're part of that. We need to make sure we do right by the people who honor us with their stories.
Absolutely. And for those of you at home, if you want to get involved with our story bank, we have a story teller organizer, Brenda Rodriguez. Jesus, it's been a long day, everyone. Brenda Rodriguez, everyone. And her contact is in the chat. So if you all want to get involved with our story bank, please contact Brenda. She should be, she's a great person. She understands this issue through and through. She will obviously respect your privacy, but that is a great way to get involved and make your voice heard, is through our story bank. And her last name is Rodriguez. Okay. Well, I was coming back to you, Bradley. So join me.
I am so pleased to hear Catherine speak about this in the way she has, because it's so vitally important, and it points to, she's talked about complacency, and I think that anybody younger than me understands that one of the avenues that got us here was a certain, let's just call it bourgeois complacency about the rights that we talked about and we championed, that were never as broadly accessible as we hoped or thought that they were. And we need a new politics, we need a new language. I think one of the things that Catherine is underscoring is that there was an enforcement of shame, so that for so many years, as one of the prices of your access to this alleged right was that you need to express shame, and that you were to admit that you had an abortion only years later in some grainy, video, horribly painful for you. What I hear Catherine saying is that we're starting over. We're going to do it better this time. And so for people younger than me, which is all of you, that cheers me tremendously. So good on you.
Thanks, Grandpappy. We appreciate that. You just aged yourself in one show. Okay. Wow. I wasn't going to age you, but you aged yourself, so that's on you. All right. I want to bring Will in because he's You're 160 years old. Is that what you just said?
The revolution is
68. I was a Johnson baby.
Oh. I mean, that's before any of us were born, so you just age yourself. Okay, I want to bring in Will. And Will, you and I have had long discussions this past week about how depressed you are every morning, waking up and waiting for different decisions that the Supreme Court is going to ruin all of our lives. So I wanted to bring you on the show so you could express your anger, and also maybe go off with Bradley a little bit about some of the other cases that are still pending and some of the cases we are waiting on with Roe and others.
Sure, certainly. So thank you for the introduction. Will Pregman, comms director here at BBP. And I do the solemn work of waking up at 7 o'clock our time on opinion days and checking scotusblog.com for their live feed chat of the opinions that come down from the court each time they hold an opinion day. And they do this starting at about May and then through June, which their term ends at the end of the month on June 30th. And what that is an incredible resource to get connected with the people that run SCOTUS Blog, who are very professional, who know a lot about the court, who are very dedicated and can give you all the tips and pointers and historical context and analysis on any of the decisions that come down. They are very nonpartisan and they can be a little bit wonky, but I find that they're really helpful for getting a good digest of what's coming down each day. And you start to pick up little memes and little little tidbits, and you get better at it as you go. And it's a really user-friendly process. I will say that today the website was a little bit slow because there were, I think, in excess of like 20,000 people on the website at the same time, refreshing and trying to see when the decisions came down. And that traffic has just been steadily increasing as we've gone on. So every year the Supreme Court hears somewhere around like 80 to 100 cases that they make decisions on. Those all come up from the courts of appeals that come up. Those cases are appealed up from the federal district courts, or Article 3 courts, as they're sometimes called. And at the Supreme Court level, they'll make these decisions that essentially are, have to be followed. That's the Marbury v. Madison that goes back to the start of the court. So we are watching for the remaining 9 cases that are left to be decided this term. Dobbs v. Jackson is one of those 9. But some of the others, the one that I'm in particular most terrified of, aside from the abortion access decision, is the West Virginia case, which is West Virginia versus the EPA, which, if decided in the right way, or I guess the wrong way, you could say, could effectively defang the Environmental Protection Agency, an agency created under President Nixon, if you can believe it, to regulate things like clean air, clean water, things of that nature. And that would be utterly disastrous, especially for us here in Nevada, where we already deal with major pollution problem. We're already dealing with communities impacted by climate change, from everything from the extreme heat to the smoke up in Reno and even in Vegas when there's wildfires in California, to our water situation with Lake Mead and running out of water. And if the EPA isn't able to do anything in terms of following executive orders or other sorts of regulations, then that is a big, big problem for our ability to address the climate crisis, because that then takes away one of the major pieces of one of the major tools, rather, of doing that, because what Congress has done is essentially allowed the EPA, the regulatory authority, to do those things. If it's then returned to Congress, we then are dependent on Congress to do those things, and we all know where that ends up on Mitch McConnell's desk. So then you end up in that situation. So that's going to be a really significant one too. There's also a handful of others. The other significant one too is the religion in schools, or prayer in schools case that's coming up too, where we're just reviving all the hits now of the past century. That one's the Kennedy v. Bremerton, and basically that is whether a public school employee can say a quiet prayer to themselves at school and not have that be denied on religious freedom grounds, and not having prayer in schools. So there's a couple different cases still out there in addition to Dobbs, and we've talked about that tonight. It's a really, really scary time, and it's just the best time to remember that the people who are the president and the people who sit in the Senate are very, very important in deciding who ends up not just on the Supreme Court, but all federal courts. And they're the ones who enable the right wing to shop around and find the best court and the best case to run these things up the chain and get our rights effectively thrown out. So, Bradley, I don't know if you have anything to add there, but that's...
Yeah, that was a really good summation. I think that the velocity of these cases at the moment, Will, is that though these conservative forces understand they have a pretty good grip on power at the moment, they don't know how long that's going to last. They don't know whether some president or some Senate majority will at some point have the temerity to change the structure of the court or something of that nature. They don't know how long this is going to last, and they're not going to waste it. That's the exercise of power from the conservative mind, right? So they're going after all the things very, very quickly, and it feels very dizzying to us. But at the same time, when you look at these in isolation, yeah, it's this wish list that they're going through. But at the same time, it's sort of, if you weren't crying, you would be laughing at some of the insipidity of some of this stuff. Like, someone's fighting for a right to say a quiet. Look, if you're saying a quiet prayer, I shouldn't even know about it. I shouldn't even hear it. Why would you go ahead and say a quiet prayer wherever you want? What do I care? But it's never that I want to say a quiet prayer to myself. It's that I want to impose my quiet prayer upon you during public time, right? That's the second half of the sentence, right? Which is itself, ludicrous. Go pray however many times you want, however earnestly you want, whenever you want to yourself. That's fine. This case isn't about that. It's about me stopping what we're doing and everybody joining in a prayer that was meant to be quiet, but apparently is, quiet but rather intrusive for everybody else.
They're literally saying the quiet part out loud.
That's exactly right. Stop while I quietly introduce you to all of this. And the EPA case is also really important because it's part and parcel of the movement toward deregulation and against agencies generally in this country, which I think a lot of people sort of instinctively say, hey, I don't really like huge government. But some regulation, like for the prospect of clean air and clean water, seems like a really good idea if it's carried out well. But a lot of this deregulation of the EPA comes out of the West, right? It comes out of our backyard, and it comes from the thrust of developers who see the EPA as wasting their time and their opportunity because of some, I don't know, a devil's hole pupfish or a kind of buckwheat, right? Well, I mean, that's not a very enlightened view of biodiversity and its importance. But someone like Neil Gorsuch, who I think was from the 10th Circuit and came out of Colorado, is a champion of destroying regulatory ability of agencies and deference to them, even though they may be filled with expertise, for largely this reason. There's this sort of Western developer conservationism that says it's all fine. We are really good conservationists without oversight. We just will also happen to make hundreds of millions of dollars from this condo complex that I have a brochure here for you if you're interested. Maybe I can take you to lunch and tell you about it, that sort of thing, right? So yeah, I mean, it's also cynical. But the sort of next step is, what do we do about it, right? I mean, you mentioned that study out today that the credibility or the faith that people have in the Supreme Court is at an all-time low since they've been taking these numbers. The sort of next step is, so what? What does someone do about that? I mean, as long as people do what the Supreme Court, they sort of take those orders as, well, those are the rules now, we have to follow them, then, then society goes in one direction. When people start saying, no, we're not going to listen to that, like Stalin said about the Pope, how many divisions?
Oh no, Bradley froze on Stalin and the Pope.
Well, I mean,
Bradley.
that's a clear sign that we were getting into territory that was threatening to the establishment. And so we've been clearly hijacked and shut down. But what I will say to go on to Bradley's point about what do we do about it, I think that the fact that there's such trust in the Supreme Court's integrity and impartiality, it really makes it a ripe time to pursue things like judiciary reform that includes expanding the courts, not just the Supreme Court, but the lower courts as well. And there's a practical reason for that, in addition to a political one, which is just that the caseload is massive and growing all the time, and it's severely impacting people's access to justice when the courts are clogged with tons and tons of cases that they can't get to very fast. And in addition to that, we have almost half the Supreme Court has been appointed by presidents who in recent years have lost the popular vote. So this is a court that is not representative in any way, shape, or form of America. And one of the things that Joe Biden has been doing actually has been appointing a lot of more diverse individuals to these seats. He actually just appointed 69 judges and justices, including Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, as of this week. So that's a nice number. Catherine gets it. What he's done is really taken a focus on making a judiciary that looks like America. And that was really the whole point with the Ketanji Brown Jackson nomination and others. I think by adding seats to the court, that opens up an opportunity not only to diversify our judiciary, but also sort of correct this ridiculous partisan imbalance and the fact that the court is not representative of the public at large and is not making decisions in line with what most people want. Look, polls show that a majority of Americans support access to abortion. A majority of Americans support some form of gun regulation, whether it's at least background checks or something else. So for the court to be making all these decisions that are just completely out of step and not representative of the people that they ought to govern, it's wildly inappropriate. And I think it's contributing to that declining view of the court. And I think that means it's time to expand the court, look into creating an ethics policy on the court. Currently, there isn't one for the Supreme Court, which is what allows for, people like Clarence Thomas's wife to be texting the chief of staff of the president to throw out the election results and stuff like that. That kind of thing just should not fly. And maybe Clarence Thomas needs to go before a panel too, and answer some tough questions, if not be, removed from power. I'm kind of just going off here, but that's what I think really it's going to take to correct it on the judiciary front. And then I think in terms of practicality of just taking care of one another, I think what Brianna and Catherine have said is really correct in stepping up to do the work in communities to support patients during this time, support each other during this time as, rights and certain things might get curtailed. It's going to end up being more of a local issue. So get involved in your community and the organizations that are doing the work there.
Well, thank you. And Cox is clearly having an internet meltdown on many levels tonight. So Bradley will be back with us in a second. Brianna, I want to ask you a really important question before we go to audience questions. One of the things that I think I'm most worried about, and I know you from various issues that you've worked on, but most recently, before you came to Planned Parenthood, you worked for the Human Rights Campaign. And my biggest fear is that this decision for Roe is a slippery slope for the LGBTQ community. It's a slippery slope for other communities. Bradley's back, so we can include him on this question too. What do we think about that? Roe, Bradley said Roe is the floor, and now I think they go from here and try and start bringing other things in that maybe allude to the right to privacy and things like that. So, Brianna, I'm gonna start with you, and then I'll move over to Bradley on that.
Yeah, I'm scared about that too. I think a lot of people are, and they think that's why it's so important that I'll let Bradley speak to the decisions and the legality of it. But I think that's why it's so important that we are electing champions who are going to pass legislation in our state that will make sure that we have the rights that we deserve, no matter what kind of decisions come down from the Supreme Court. Thankfully, we have had many of those champions, and we are in a place where, when it comes to the LGBTQ issues, Nevada is one of the best places in the country to be LGBTQ because of the protections that we have and because of the hard work that many elected officials and advocates have done over many years. But I feel your fear there, and I agree, it is a scary time. And I think that what we can do right now is just make sure that we are pushing our elected officials, holding them accountable, and enshrining all of these rights into our Nevada statute and laws.
Bradley, you want to weigh in on that? The slippery slope situation where they start with Roe and then go on to other rights for other human beings?
Yeah, I'm sorry I dropped off there. It's actually quite unfortunate. I was in like a 3-minute riff on Social Breakdown, so I'm sorry you missed that. But it was cathartic anyway. Yeah, look, the sort of bases for a lot of these decisions are transferable, right? That there's not an enumerated right in the Constitution for X, Y, and Z, so that's out now. No matter how long we have observed it, whether it's been 50 years like Roe or 100 years like the New York law. It is a use, an instrumentalization of the constitutional text in a way that is incredibly dangerous for those of us who believe we have to live in a modern world, and that the laws that are constructed to govern our lives have to meet the practicalities and the exigencies of our existence, right? I don't live in 1789, right? I mean, that would be horrible. I would hate to live in 1789. It'd be the worst thing ever, for a billion different reasons. The fact is, we don't live then, right? That was before the 13th Amendment. It was before the Emancipation and the suffragette movement. We're not, as the title of this show is, we're not going back. We're not going back to 1790 either. It's a ludicrous approach to constitutional rights, but it is now in the ascendance, and so we better be ready to fight it. And so, just like in the abortion context, we need to come up with a new politics and a new way to fight it. Because I got a horrible truth for everybody. For the last 50 years, the right has out-organized the living shit out of us. And you either recognize that because that's the world we live in and the politics we have to fight, or you're just gonna float along until the next bad thing happens to you and your family, and there's no way back from it.
All right, I want to end the official question and answer period with Catherine tonight. And Catherine, I want to ask you this question because we've alluded to it from our other speakers, but I want to get your opinion on it. Is there a point where the Supreme Court loses legitimacy? We're hearing about the poll that came out today. And in your opinion, do you think, as a journalist especially, do you think they're starting to lose legitimacy with these types of decisions, not just abortion, but the other ones we talked about tonight? And even the other branches of government, right? I think people are starting to call into question even Congress and their ability to get literally anything done at this point. I mean, even the bare minimum when kids are shot is like pulling teeth to get Congress to actually do something about it. So what does the world look like, and how do we defend each other's rights and freedoms in this world? And how do we hold these institutions accountable? Because they should not be immune from being held accountable, even the Supreme Court.
So that's very much the question for people in my work right now, because throughout this whole process, I mean, this has been going on since the Bush era, beyond that, of us getting slowly desensitized to utterly bonkers people and legislation working on multiple different levels. And I'm reminded of Milton Mayer's They Thought They Were Free, which chronicles Germany between 1933 and 1945. Not a great time, but he talks about a populace being governed by surprise. And that terminology is what has really always been resonating for me about our audience right now, is with a whiplash news cycle that's constantly serving up, here's another bad thing, that you immediately don't have action steps to intervene on. You become desensitized, and over time just kind of beaten down and bogged down by it. And I think that's the major risk we have as in this, late capitalist hellscape, is making sure that people don't become desensitized and don't rest on the fact that institutions like the Supreme Court, like the presidency, like all of these big, moving, powerful entities, we don't rest on the fact that just because they have existed in this form for X many years on precedent, that they have to be. We need to have an imaginative, a more creative, and a more compassionate approach to our politics. And that also means our political storytelling and our political reporting. We can't be like, the court has been this way because it has been this way because it has been this way, and therefore they can do whatever they want while representing a minority. We cannot accept that, and we have to functionally, as a media environment too, stop propping up and trying to tap dance around and act like it's still normal, or treating it like a spectator sporting event. I'm on SCOTUS blog every morning too, and so that's a part of, everyone who's in this work is watching with their hearts in their throats. But there's also a little bit of this gamified nature to it in the media narratives, and I think that's something we have to kill with fire too. These are people's lives. This is way more serious than blue team won, red team won, and we need to really, really decisively put that to bed, because there's no way to live if we're constantly taking jabs at one another and taking away everything that makes you have an independent life or have the opportunity to have an independent life.
So Catherine, I'm going to start with you with the audience questions, because I think it's very much in the theme of what you just talked about with Nazi Germany and some of the things we've seen historically. Often my husband and I talk about themes from the past kind of creeping in, and how the past is now the present, and history has a tendency to repeat itself. So Rudy asked, how many years did we set America back just today with these horrific decisions on guns and on our Miranda rights, and earlier in the week with the religious institutions being able to get public dollars to defund our public schools, eventually coming abortion? How far are we setting America back, and why do you think this history is repeating itself?
I think, unfortunately, when it comes to how far we're setting it back, my answer is very much that we're realizing that the things we thought were real and concrete and protected and enshrined just weren't. And that has to do with a lot of our civics education, or lack thereof. In this country, we're very good at giving certain messaging to young people and our voting populace, and not giving them other things. So unfortunately, like, the setback answer is like, the floor has always been a really thin sheet of ice, and that's my bummer answer to that. Is undoubtedly the impact is going to be felt, but this has been the slow moving horror movie always. And then people have always been the same, and I say that both as a compliment and both derogatory. Like, people have been the same in the way that, like, we love each other, we're compassionate, we're a social animal that want to see our communities thrive, and that's like the best of us. But we also have had systems of power, and had people who pleasure in having their boot on someone's neck, and that part is like eternal. And if we aren't vigilant, if we aren't consistently protecting the lines of what's going to keep our people safe, especially our most vulnerable, our marginalized, our queer, our people of color, like, we are not, as communities, aggressive and vigilant, the slope becomes the cliff, becomes the chasm.
Absolutely. All right, Bradley, I want to move to you for a couple of questions from the audience. The first one comes from Shelby, and she asked if SCOTUS rules on something, not just abortion, which we know we're kind of insulated from, but on other things like the religious school thing, the Miranda rights, the gun stuff. If they rule on something, is there anything to be done statewide to protect Nevadans and from their shitty rulings?
The lawyer's answer to that is it depends, right? Because if the basis for it is the federal constitution, it's going to be broadly applicable, and laws that conflict with that from the states are going to be struck down. That said, one of the things about the law is everything stems from individual cases. And if you can find things that distinguish your situation from the situation that the court ruled upon, there may be, spaces to carve out protections or different rulings. This particular Supreme Court appears intent upon painting with the broadest possible conservative brush it can to sweep in all that it can, and to create momentum for those things that it can't. So, for example, the ruling about the guns from Justice Thomas today could have been, as we said before, resolved on really narrow grounds, right, involving concealed carry permits and how the state can regulate those. But instead, they took the opportunity to implant this utterly impractical new way of looking at the Constitution generally. It was, the sort of most radical thing that happened today was Justice Thomas saying, here's a whole new way of approaching constitutional interpretation, and it's going to rule not just gun regulation, but who knows what's next after that. So the answer, Shelby, is that as long as the Supreme Court is ruling on what it says is its interpretation of the federal Constitution, and as long as we have a union, it's going to be difficult for the states to protect themselves.
All right, and the next question I'm going to combine just for time purposes, because I know we're going over. I appreciate you all hanging with us so we can get, there's a lot of stuff coming in tonight. Ignacio and Rudy ask, and like I said, I'm combining their questions. Bradley, do you think that the Supreme Court just set the stage to destroy secular public schools? And how is it that private schools can discriminate against students but get funding from taxpayers' money? Where do we draw the line so that they can and cannot discriminate against, especially students with special needs or LGBTQ students, those types of things?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent pair of questions that actually do dovetail. So for Rudy and Ignacio, those are questions we can take together, which is what the Supreme Court did today, was set us on a path of how we talk about or conceive of voucher funding that plays into the project of the right wing to destroy public schools. Absolutely right. Because everyone knows that private schools can discriminate or can have curricular aspects that are utterly different than what would be taught or required in secular public schools. But what they've done is say, okay, once you're handing out money, you are handing out money to parents. And parents get to make the decision to send their kids with that money wherever they want to send. So that break from saying this is taxpayer money and it shouldn't wind up in the coffers of a private school, that break that was made is exceptionally important. And without a fight or organizing in a fight over not just the reality of it, but the language surrounding of it, they have done exactly what you fear, which is set us on that particular path. And the slope is really, really slippery.
All right, last question is for you, Brianna, and I think this is an important one as we kind of wrap this up and close on the note of abortion and protecting abortion here in the state of Nevada. This question comes from Manuel. He asks, can a Republican majority in our state legislature put forth a referendum to reverse the protections in place in Nevada around abortion? And if you don't have the answer, we'll have Bradley hop in, but I do know that the legislature can put forth referendums. It's got to go through a slightly different process, but what are your thoughts on that? And Bradley, if you want to hop in with Brianna on that too, you can.
Yeah, for sure. Bradley, jump in, legal eagle. If I misspeak, because because the right to abortion in Nevada is statutorily protected, that means that it takes a vote of the people to change. And Nevadans overwhelmingly support abortion care. That being said, Nevadans still have a lot of limited access to abortion care. There are still barriers that we face in our communities, and we are fighting to remove a lot of those barriers and expand access to care, make it more affordable. And so there is still a lot of work to be done in our state, which is why we need those pro-abortion care majorities still in our state legislature, and we need a governor who is going to sign those bills into law, because there's still a lot of work to do in our state.
Yeah, Brianna is, as always, exactly right. There are ways to chip away at abortion access to abortion rights in this state that are apart from the statutory rights, the super statutory rights that are enshrined here. And in fact, as she knows, as some of you may know, we're facing the prospect of ballot initiatives involving parental notification and way radically expanded parental rights to control healthcare decisions and mental health decisions of children. We're fighting that in court at the moment. But the technical question is, it would take a referendum to undo it, which is something that in this context would have to come from the people. So someone would have to go out, get signatures to put this on the ballot. The legislature itself would not be able to do that in this particular context, which is good, because it's a pain in the neck to go out and get signatures. It's a hard thing to do. It should be a hard thing to do. It would be problematic if the legislature could simply pick the election that it wanted. If some right-wing legislature could pick the election that it wanted to target to destroy the statute and just sort of pop it on the ballot, that would be problematic, but that's not going to be possible. So that's some good news.
All right. Well, I want to thank our panel. I want to let you know, as the decision for Roe versus Wade comes down, obviously look to Planned Parenthood for next steps. Look to us for next steps. We'll have information out about what's going to happen. The day that the decision is actually made, whether it's tomorrow, because they added another decision day tomorrow, or Monday, which, or another day next week, because they still have several decisions to make over the next couple of days. I also want to let y'all know, if you're feeling depressed like I am, and like many of us on this panel and our team, we do have something fun coming up to maybe turn that frown upside down a little bit. We're going to have bingo night coming up next Tuesday. It's a virtual bingo night. It's campaign cliche bingo. So we can have a little fun, get some of our rage and anger out on the bingo cards. It's all virtual, so it's COVID safe. It's $15. Join us. We have some excellent prizes from some of our board members, and it's going to be lots of fun, and it'll be a good way to share some space, have some camaraderie, and maybe share a little sorrow depending on when that decision comes down. So I want to thank our panel tonight. We'll put the information for bingo in the chat right now. So if you're watching, please sign up. We want to end our fiscal year on a high note. So help us do a little fundraiser, sign up for bingo. It should be very fun. All right, we will be back out in front next week talking about all the things impacting Nevadans, live at 5 o'clock next Thursday. So you're going to want to join us. We're going to be talking about taxing billionaires next week. So that should be a really fun segment full of rage as well. So you want to be there. We're going to tax some billionaires. And you're going to want to join us next Thursday at 5 p.m. live on the Battleborn Progress pages. So we will see you all next week. Make sure you're staying safe and healthy, everyone. And we will talk to you next Thursday at 5 p.m. Thanks, everyone. Good job, Bev, for running the program tonight. And thanks for hanging with us when we had some technical difficulties. We appreciate all of you. Have a great evening, everyone.